Shalom, beloved. My name is Miss Highsmith, and I'm so glad that you've decided to join me here today for the APA Apology Response series. Now, beloved, if you're not aware, back in February of 2021, the American Psychological Association, better known as the APA, issued a public apology to individuals and communities of color for the role they played in promoting, perpetuating, and failing to challenge racism, racial discrimination, and human hierarchy in the United States. Beloved, let us begin. For it is in this episode we'll focus specifically on paragraph number 27, where I quote, "Whereas racist behaviors and ideologies are evidenced in the health inequities of pandemics and disease on Indigenous people, including over 570 tribal nations, Black African American, Asian American, Pacific Islander American, Latina and Latino, and Latinx, and AMENA peoples and communities. Psychologists also provided ideological support for and failed to speak out against the colonial framework of the government-sponsored industrial, boarding, and day school systems for Indigenous youth. The tragic hate crimes and killings of Black people at the hands of law enforcement, the surge in hate crimes against and ongoing harms perpetuated by model minorities, stereotyping of Asian Americans, the inhumane treatment and systemic targeting and historical exclusion of immigrants of color from the civil rights granted by U.S. citizenship, through immigration policy and its aggressive enforcement and the mistreatment and criminalization of undocumented immigrants who lack access to a pathway to U.S. citizenship. The continuing hate crimes and speech perpetuated against AMENA people, and the overall climate of xenophobia in the U.S. These examples of racism are widespread and impact either directly or indirectly all individuals who belong to marginalized racial groups, including multiracial persons." Close quote. Beloved, this statement addresses the systemic racism and ideological support for harmful practices affecting marginalized communities, particularly focusing on Indigenous peoples, Black African Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islander Americans, Latinas and Latinos, and Latinx and AMENA, which are Arab, Middle Eastern, North African individuals. Now let's break down each of these critical issues mentioned. Number one, health inequities. Racism is evident in the stark health inequities faced by marginalized communities during pandemics like COVID-19. For instance, the CDC reported that Black Americans were 2.1 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than white Americans, and Hispanic Americans were 1.5 times more likely. These disparities are rooted in systemic factors like lack of access to healthcare, socioeconomic disadvantages, and pre-existing conditions exacerbated by structural inequalities. Number two, colonial framework in Indigenous boarding schools. The APA also acknowledges the harmful legacy of government-sponsored industrial and day school systems designed to assimilate Indigenous youth. Over 350,000 Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and placed in these schools where they faced physical, emotional abuse, and cultural suppression. These practices, driven by colonial ideologies, left lasting scars on generations of Indigenous people. Number 3, hate crimes in law enforcement. We cannot ignore the tragic reality of Black people losing their lives at the hands of law enforcement. The killing of George Floyd ignited worldwide protests and sparked a movement for justice. Black Americans are disproportionately affected by police violence. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, Black people are 2.5 more likely to be killed by the police compared to white people. This is compounded by systemic issues such as racial profiling, excessive use of force, and lack of accountability within police departments. Number 4, hate crimes, the model minority. The COVID-19 pandemic brought with it a surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans. In fact, a report from Stop AAPI Hate documented over 10,000 incidents of anti-Asian hate between March of 2020 and December of 2021. One aspect of this harmful trend is model minority stereotype, which depicts Asian Americans as universally successful and resilient. But this often overshadows the real and varied challenges they face. It's essential that we understand the complexity of their experiences and the ways this stereotype contributes to further discrimination. Number 5, immigration policy and systemic targeting. Racially biased immigration policies have led to the exclusion and criminalization of immigrants of color, particularly those without access to a pathway to citizenship. Historically, laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act and the current aggressive enforcement of immigration laws contribute to the mistreatment and marginalization of these individuals, denying them basic civil rights and protections afforded to U.S. citizens. Number 6, hate crimes and xenophobia against AMENA peoples. AMENA communities, known as Arab, Middle Eastern, North African individuals, have been subjected to a rise in hate crimes, particularly following the September 11 attacks. The FBI reports that hate crimes against Muslims and Arabs continue to be a serious issue, reflecting a climate of xenophobia that targets these communities. The overall impact is that these examples illustrate the widespread and deeply rooted issue of systemic racism that affects marginalized racial groups in diverse and complex ways. Whether it's through health disparities, historical injustices, hate crimes, discriminatory policies, or ongoing social and economic inequities. Racism continues to pervade many aspects of life in the U.S., and unfortunately, psychologists, among others, have historically failed to challenge or have even supported these harmful systems. In order to confront and dismantle these structures of injustice, we must hold ourselves accountable and advocate for systemic change. This requires us to reflect critically on the role psychology and other disciplines have played in perpetuating these ideologies and to work intentionally toward creating a more just and equitable society for all. Thank you for joining me today, beloved. As we reflected on these painful truths, let's commit ourselves to the work of #FreeSquare, a movement for liberation, justice, and healing. For together, we can confront systemic racism and help create the change we all deserve. Shalom, beloved.